Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are well, and thank you for joining us on our continuing discussion related to this Eurasian empire that has presented historically as an African kingdom. And as with the many names of this Ouida kingdom, you have the people known as the Dahomey, the Yoruba, the Fon, the Moors, Edom. You have them having multiple identities and transliterations that actually situate them historically as what would be considered Black Europeans and Black Asians, simply doing business as Black Africans. And as you can already see, this name Dahomey, this kingdom, is essentially a Eurasian kingdom that is tied up in theocracy and mythology. At first blush, you see a kingdom, Dahomey, that is simply presenting as a kingdom that emerged out of nowhere on the west coast of Africa. However, when you look at this kingdom more closely, you see that this kingdom is a part of a larger system. And you also see that this kingdom has Eurasian roots. And you see that there is a heavy theocracy dynamic with respect to this kingdom. You also see this kingdom taking on many identities and using various spellings. These aren't just transliterations, but you have distinct spellings with respect to Dahomey that leads you to different identities with respect to Dahomey. And so we're going to look at a couple of very unusual spellings with respect to Dahomey that are in addition to the other spellings and transliterations that we've looked at. Now this one is very interesting. This is related to Haitian maroonage. And in this particular article, Dahomey is referred to as Dahomet. And here they are questioning whether this might be a variant spelling of Dahomey. And yes, it is. But what they are also indicating is that this name, this variant, Dahomet, has shown up as both a nation and it's also shown up as a name used by individuals who had been enslaved. Now, some might argue that that was a simple typo, however, it was not. And we're going to look at some other examples of the use of this Dahomet for Dahomey. And this is letters on West Africa and the slave trade. And so this is an ancient work, and you see here that the king of Dahomey was identified as the king of Dahomet. And you also see a variation in terms of spelling with the Oyos as Ayos. And so you will see this pattern repeated with these multiple spellings within a singular sentence even. And so this goes back to that whole idea of creating this confusion. And here you see them specifying that Dahomet is the same as Dahomey. What's not clear, however, is why there are these distinct spellings, because it doesn't indicate that Dahomet goes with a particular language that is distinct from Dahomey. And we already talked about this, that dynamic of playing around with Savi or Savi. And so you see here Savi, which was S-A-V-I, spelled S-A-V-E and S-A-W-I. And so in this one space, you are going to see Dahomey take on multiple identities. So first you see in this chapter, the Amazons of Dahomet. Typically this would say Dahomey. However, in this instance, it's been changed to Dahomet. You also see this indication that the word Dahomey is more properly indicated as Daomi, which is D-A, and then they have a hyphen, O-M-I, indicating that it means Da's belly. Now you remember that discussion before about this whole identity of Dahomey perhaps being Danhomey. However, the saga continues with yet another spelling, which is D-A-O-M-I. OMI without the hyphen. And since the authors have taken great effort to emphasize the OMI, we are going to recap our earlier discussion about the word OMI. And as you recall, OMI is another word for man. And so when you combine their understanding, Dahomey, Yoruba, Moors, Fon, Edom, when you combine those understandings of Da being a god, a small G-O-D, and then you have Omi, or what you essentially have is either God, man, or man, God. So not only do you have that emphasis, you also have this indication that Dahomey is associated with the Druids and the Egyptians of old, and this is based upon some of their religious practices. And this shouldn't be surprising when you consider the fact that there is some interconnectedness with respect to Edom, Dahomey, Yoruba, Fon, Moors. And with this writing on the social history of a West African slaving port, you also see this mention of Dahomey. And this is from Robin Law, and this individual is considered an expert on the history of Dahomey. And so this is noteworthy that this individual is also identifying this kingdom variously as Dahomey and Dahomey. And as you recall, there were instances where the word Savi was Xavier or Savi. And here you see those variations with respect to Ouida, Huida, Saba, Savi. You just have all of these variations all over the place with these names. And so it's very difficult to keep track of exactly what is being indicated. And so again, you see Hueda with Hueda, and then you see Savi with Sabba. You also have some variations here with respect to the theology dynamic in Dahomey and the west coast of Africa. In many instances, the Dahomey people are presented as having a pagan history. And then you see a history that is an Islamic history. And so it becomes very confusing to keep track of exactly what was going on in Dahomey. And then, of course, with the Morisco Marrano dynamic, you have this Catholic history. So you have a number of things going on with just this one group of people. And here you see this referring back to Dahomey. So initially there's a discussion about Dahomey, and then it jumps into Dahomey. And here again you see instances of Dahomey being referred to as Dahomey. Now, not only do you have the Dahomey, Dahomey, you have another variant, and it is Dan Ho Min. And this is the source, if you look up at the top, that identified the Amazons of Dahomey as Black Sparta. So the Amazons of Black Sparta. And so there was that connection made there with respect to Dahomey and Greece. It seems like an unlikely connection, but the connection is definitely there. And you see multiple connections between Dahomey and Yoruba, the Fon, the Moors, and Turkey and Greece and Rome. And so this is just an additional linkage between these entities and these geopolitical spaces. And so if you look down at the bottom in the middle, you see this master's thesis that is referring to this royal house of Dan Ho Min. In keeping with the Amazons of Black Sparta, what you have with this Dan Ho Min is that it is Arabic detected. And so there was a French title with this Arabic detected indication for Dahomey. So instead of having a French rendition of Dahomey, there was an Arabic rendition of Dahomey. And so with Dan Ho Min, when it translated into the Greek, there was a specific indication that this was a religious entity. And the translation situated it with Ionic Greece. And so there was a reference to the performance of religious observances and worship. This particular variant of Dahomey was indicative of religious worship, ritual, and service to God. And when translating from the Arabic into the English, the indication was Dan Ho Min meant their religion. You see this religious connection again when going from the Arabic into the Latin, and you see coram religio. And here you see this continued association between this Dahomey and Ami. You see here with the HO that is a translation of Omicron. So that HO is that Greek small letter Omicron. You also see that HO associated with what is known as holmium, and this is a rare earth. And it's interesting, the little image looks very similar to some of those figures that we looked at before that were identified as Amorite. Now this Ho also translates to a number of things in science, and one of them is this word homia. Now homia has multiple meanings, and one is that it is related to a genus of well-known extinct arthropods. And these arthropods, interestingly, were noted in Scandinavia, Poland, and Morocco. And here you can just see a list of species previously assigned to this HO or this homia. And if you want to check this homia out, this is additional information related to it. And this is additional information. You can see the depiction of this arthropod on the right-hand side. And this is a closer depiction of homia. So not only do you have this HO being associated with this arthropod, you also have the HO represented on the periodic table. And this holmium is named for the Greek word for Sweden. And so this HO symbolism is related to this substance that is known as rare earth that has unusual magnetic properties and is used in working with strong magnetic fields. As with many things related to Dahomey, the Faun, the Yoruba, the Moors, Edom, there's a big circle. And so this circle of Homi, Homia, Homoi, Hermia, it takes us right back to Turkey and Greece. And so this HO, this Ho, is related to a site that is located near Asiatic Turkey. And in keeping with this big circle with respect to Dahomey and this focus on the HO, Ho, you also have this focus on Hermia coming out of that Holmi. And what you see Hermia is related to Hermes, but also Hermia is the Greek god of trade. Another notation with respect to this big circle is that Homi or Homoi was a town of ancient Phrygia. However, this site has not been located. As we wrap up this examination and discussion of Dahomey, Dahomet, Dan Ho Min, and the variety of other names that Dahomey has been known for, the question remains, why was this Eurasian empire presenting as an African kingdom on the west coast of Africa. Why were these black, brown Europeans and Asians representing themselves as indigenous Africans or indigenous to that space on the west coast of Africa? This isn't just Dahomey. We are talking about the overwhelming number of people on that west coast of Africa recreating their identities on the west coast of Africa and simultaneously recreating the identities of the people that were in Africa prior to them arriving there. You also have the same dynamic going on in the Americas. And so it has created quite a bit of confusion with this sort of Eurasian empire invasion all across the world. And so the question still remains, what purpose did this serve? What purpose does it serve now? Because clearly there appeared to be an end game, a goal in mind with all of these dynamics going on. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.